When airport security told a black businessman you don't belong in first class and demanded he prove his worth, he didn't argue, didn't yell, he just made one phone call, and what happened next? Silenced the entire terminal. At 34, Marcus had already achieved more than most entrepreneurs dream of in a lifetime. Thompson Industries employed over 800 people, held patents on cybersecurity technologies, and was valued at $800 million. The company he'd started in his garage was now a major government contractor. The morning rush at Chicago O'Hare International Airport was in full swing. Business travelers hurried through the concourses, dragging rolling suitcases and clutching coffee cups, their faces focused on the day's agenda. Terminal 1 buzzed with the familiar energy of people trying to catch flights, make connections, and navigate the controlled chaos of one of America's busiest airports. Among the crowd moved Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old black businessman who carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes negotiation. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, Italian leather shoes that gleamed despite the airport's harsh fluorescent lighting, and carried a leather briefcase that had been a gift from his wife when his company went public 2 years earlier. But despite his impeccable appearance and obvious success, Marcus had learned through years of experience that airports could be challenging terrain for black men, regardless of their achievements or status. The assumptions, the extra scrutiny, the questions that other passengers never faced, he'd encountered them all before. Today should have been different. Marcus was flying first class to New York for a merger meeting that would determine the future of Thompson Industries, the cybersecurity company he'd built from nothing into a firm worth $800 million. He was one of the youngest black CEOs to take a company public, and his success story had been featured on the covers of Fortune, Forbes, and Black Enterprise magazine. As Marcus approached the TSA's security checkpoint, he noticed the usual morning crowd, business travelers efficiently removing laptops and shoes, families struggling with strollers and carry-on bags, and the occasional celebrity trying to move through the line without being recognized. The security area was supervised by Agent Patricia Reynolds, a 45-year-old TSA supervisor who had been working at O'Hare for 12 years. Reynolds had built her reputation on what she called maintaining order, which often meant making quick judgments about passengers based on appearance and her own assumptions about who belonged where. When Reynolds spotted Marcus in the first-class security line, her prejudices immediately activated. Despite his expensive suit and confident demeanor, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. In her experience, black men in first class usually meant trouble. Either they were using someone else's tickets or trying to access services they couldn't afford. "Excuse me, sir," Reynolds called out as Marcus placed his briefcase on the conveyor belt. Her voice carried across the security area, loud enough for other passengers to hear and turn their heads. Marcus looked up, already sensing the familiar shift in atmosphere that preceded these encounters. He'd experienced this moment dozens of times before in hotel lobbies, restaurant hostess stands, and airport lounges when someone's assumptions about his ability to afford luxury services triggered additional scrutiny. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his tone respectful but alert. "I need to see your boarding pass and ID," Reynolds announced, though she had already examined both documents when Marcus entered the first-class line just minutes earlier. Marcus handed over the requested items without comment, his expression neutral but watchful. Years of experience had taught him that any sign of irritation or impatience would only escalate these situations and provide justification for even more aggressive treatment. Reynolds took the documents and began what appeared to be an incredibly thorough examination, holding them up to the light as if checking for sophisticated forgeries. She studied the boarding pass from multiple angles, ran her finger along the edges to check the paper quality, and scrutinized Marcus's driver's license as if it might be a masterful fake. The boarding pass clearly showed a first-class seat statement purchased through a corporate account. Marcus's driver's license was obviously authentic, bearing the security features and printing quality of official Illinois documentation. But Reynolds continued her theatrical inspection, while other passengers in line began to notice the unusual delay. "Miss Thompson," she said slowly, drawing out each syllable as if testing the name for authenticity. "You're flying first class to New York today?" "Yes, ma'am, I am," Marcus replied calmly. though he could feel the eyes of other passengers beginning to focus on their interaction. "That's very interesting," Reynolds continued, her voice growing louder and more skeptical with each word. "Because we've been having significant issues lately with people using tickets that don't belong to them. Especially in first class. Very expensive tickets that most people can't actually afford to purchase legitimately." The implication was clear, and it hung in the air like toxic smoke. Reynolds wasn't simply verifying his documentation. She was publicly questioning his right to use premium services based on assumptions about his financial capabilities. Other passengers in the first-class line had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation unfold. Business travelers, who normally rushed through security procedures, were now focused on the drama playing out at the checkpoint. Several people had discreetly pulled out their phones, sensing that something significant was happening that might be worth recording. Marcus felt the familiar burn of discrimination that had followed him throughout his career. He'd experienced similar moments in venture capital meetings where investors questioned his technical expertise, in corporate boardrooms where colleagues assumed he was the diversity hire rather than the CEO, and in high-end restaurants where hostesses seemed shocked when he requested their best tables. "I can assure you the ticket belongs to me," Marcus said, his voice still controlled but with an edge that made nearby travelers pause their conversations. "I purchased it myself through my corporate account." Reynolds laughed dismissively. "Right, and I suppose you're going to tell me you're some kind of big-shot businessman who flies first class all the time." "Actually, I am," Marcus replied quietly. "I'm the CEO of Thompson Industries. We're a cybersecurity company based in Chicago." Reynolds's expression grew more skeptical rather than less. "CEO, huh? Funny how many CEOs we get through here. Usually they're a little more credible-looking." The phrase credible-looking hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he maintained his composure. He'd faced this type of coded language before, the kind of discrimination that was just subtle enough to provide plausible deniability. "Ma'am, I understand you're doing your job," Marcus said, though he could see that this had moved beyond standard security protocol. "But I've provided all the documentation you've requested. Is there a specific security concern I can help address?" By now, the confrontation had drawn significant attention. The first-class security line had backed up as other passengers stopped to watch. Business travelers who normally rushed through security were now focused on the unfolding drama. Airport staff from other areas had begun to notice the disturbance. But Reynolds wasn't finished. The audience seemed to embolden her, and what had started as suspicious questioning was evolving into something more personal and cruel. "The concern," she said, her voice carrying across the security area, "is that we have standards in first class. People who fly first class are serious business travelers, executives, people who understand proper airport behavior. They don't typically cause disruptions or draw attention to themselves." The lecture was delivered with the kind of casual condescension that comes from someone who has never been challenged on their assumptions. Marcus stood in the middle of one of Chicago's busiest airports, being treated like a potential criminal because someone couldn't imagine that a black man could legitimately afford luxury travel. "I haven't caused any disruption," Marcus replied, his voice still steady despite the building frustration. "I've simply presented my valid documentation and attempted to proceed through security like every other passenger." "That's debatable," Reynolds shot back. "Your attitude from the moment you approached this checkpoint has been confrontational. You've been argumentative and suspicious, which is exactly the kind of behavior we watch for in security screenings." The gaslighting was breathtaking. Marcus had done nothing except respond to Reynolds's increasingly hostile questions, but she was now rewriting the narrative to paint him as the aggressor in a situation where he was clearly the victim. Agent Johnson, a younger TSA officer who had been watching the interaction with growing discomfort, finally stepped forward. "Agent Reynolds, maybe we should—" "Agent Johnson," Reynolds cut him off sharply. "I'm handling this situation. Thompson here claims to be a CEO, but he can't seem to provide adequate proof of his identity or his right to be in first class. I've provided exactly the same documentation as every other passenger," Marcus said, his patience finally beginning to wear thin. "Have you?" Reynolds challenged. "Because I'm looking at this boarding pass and something doesn't seem right about it. The printing quality looks off, the airline logo seems faded, And frankly, the seat assignment seems too good to be true for someone in your circumstances. She was now openly questioning the authenticity of documents that were clearly legitimate, creating a fictional narrative to justify her discriminatory treatment. Marcus realized that no amount of documentation or reasonable discussion would satisfy Reynolds. She had decided he didn't belong in first class based on her prejudices, and she was determined to humiliate him until he accepted her judgment. But what Reynolds didn't know was that Marcus Thompson hadn't built a multi-million-dollar company by backing down when people underestimated him. He'd survived venture capital meetings where investors questioned his expertise and corporate boardrooms where colleagues assumed he was the diversity hire. A TSA agent with a power complex wasn't going to be his undoing. "Agent Reynolds," Marcus said, his voice taking on a tone that made everyone within earshot stop what they were doing. "Since you seem to doubt my credentials, perhaps I should make a phone call to clear this up." "Feel free," Reynolds replied with smug confidence. "Call whoever you want. It won't change the fact that something doesn't add up about your story." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and dialed a number he rarely used but always kept handy for situations exactly like this one. He put the phone on speaker so everyone in the security area could hear the conversation that would change everything. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "This is Commissioner Patricia Walsh, Chicago Department of Aviation. How can I help you?" The security area fell completely silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The clicking of shoes against tile floors ceased. Even the ambient noise from the food courts and gate areas seemed to fade away as people processed what they had just heard. "Commissioner Walsh, this is Marcus Thompson. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm having an issue with TSA security at Terminal 1, and I thought you should be aware of what's happening." "Marcus," Walsh's voice warmed immediately. "What kind of issue? Are you okay?" Reynolds' face had gone completely pale. The commissioner of Chicago's Department of Aviation was not only answering Marcus's call personally, but she clearly knew him well enough to be concerned about his welfare. "I'm fine," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had just proven they operated at levels Reynolds couldn't comprehend. "But Agent Reynolds here has been questioning the authenticity of my boarding pass, suggesting I can't afford first class, and implying that I don't belong in the airport's premium services." There was a pause on the line that seemed to last forever, though it was probably only a few seconds. When Walsh spoke again, her voice had taken on the steel-edged tone of someone who was about to end careers. "Agent Reynolds, are you there?" Walsh asked. Reynolds opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was facing the woman who controlled every aspect of airport operations at O'Hare, and she had just been caught in the act of harassing one of the commissioner's personal contacts. "She's here," Marcus confirmed. "Agent Reynolds," Walsh continued, her voice carrying across the terminal with unmistakable authority, "I want you to listen very carefully. Miss Thompson is not only a legitimate passenger with every right to fly first class anywhere he chooses, he's also a member of the Chicago Aviation Advisory Board and a personal friend of mine." The revelation hit everyone in the security area like a shockwave. Marcus wasn't just a successful businessman, he was connected to the highest levels of airport management, city government, and federal cybersecurity operations. The man Reynolds had been publicly humiliating for the past 20 minutes wasn't just someone who could afford first class, he was someone whose work kept airports like O'Hare secure from digital attacks. Furthermore, Walsh continued, her voice carrying the weight of official authority, "Thompson Industries provides cybersecurity services for the entire O'Hare airport system. The man Agent Reynolds has been harassing literally helps keep this airport safe from cyber threats that could shut down our operations." Reynolds stood frozen, her face now completely drained of color as the full magnitude of her mistake became clear. She hadn't just humiliated a random passenger, she had publicly attacked someone who had direct influence over airport operations and personal relationships with people who could end her career with a single recommendation. Additionally, Walsh continued, ensuring that everyone listening understood the complete scope of Reynolds's error, "Mr. Thompson serves on the Chicago Aviation Advisory Board, where he helps develop policies for airport security, customer service, and operational efficiency. His recommendations directly influence how we train and evaluate TSA personnel. The implication was staggering. Reynolds had been discriminating against someone who literally helped write the policies that governed her own job performance and professional development. But Commissioner Walsh wasn't finished delivering the consequences of Reynolds' actions, and what she said next would ensure that this incident became a case study in how discrimination could destroy careers and damage institutional reputation. Agent Reynolds, I want you to understand something very clearly, Walsh said, her voice taking on the cold, professional tone of someone delivering a career-ending verdict. Your behavior today represents everything that's wrong with discriminatory profiling in airport security. You've embarrassed the TSA, endangered the airport's relationship with one of our most important business partners, and violated every principle of equal treatment that we've spent years trying to establish. Johnson looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Other TSA agents who had gathered to watch the confrontation were backing away from Reynolds, clearly trying to distance themselves from her actions. Airport management personnel who had arrived to investigate the disturbance were taking notes and speaking quietly into their radios. Consider this your official notice, Walsh continued, that your employment with the Transportation Security Administration is under immediate review. I will be speaking with TSA management within the hour, and I expect a full investigation of your conduct to begin today. This incident will be reviewed at the federal level, and I can assure you that there will be serious consequences for your actions. The promise of federal review sent ripples of panic through Reynolds' expression. TSA employment was governed by federal regulations, and discrimination cases were taken very seriously by Washington headquarters. Her 12-year career was about to end in the most public and humiliating way possible. Commissioner Walsh, Reynolds tried to stammer some kind of explanation or apology. I'm not finished. Walsh cut her off with administrative authority that brooked no interruption. Mr. Thompson, I want to personally apologize to you on behalf of the entire Chicago Department of Aviation. This treatment is completely unacceptable and does not represent our values, our policies, or our commitment to serving all passengers with dignity and respect. The apology was public, official, and witnessed by dozens of travelers who were recording every word for social media distribution. It was also a legal document that would later be used in the inevitable investigation and potential litigation that would follow this. Thank you, Commissioner, Marcus said, his voice carrying the composed authority of someone who had just demonstrated they operated at levels Reynolds couldn't comprehend. I appreciate your immediate response and your commitment to addressing this situation. Marcus, I want you to know that this incident will be investigated at the highest levels of airport management and federal transportation security. There will be accountability, and there will be changes to ensure that this never happens to you or any other passenger again. After ending the call, Marcus looked around at the crowd of witnesses who had watched his public humiliation transform into official vindication and administrative justice. Phones were still recording, videos were being uploaded to social media platforms, and the story was already beginning its viral journey across the internet. The transformation in atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. TSA agents who had been watching Reynolds' discriminatory performance now rushed to assist Marcus through the security process. Airport staff apologized repeatedly. Fellow passengers approached to offer support in business cards, recognizing that they had just witnessed someone with serious influence in the aviation industry. Agent Johnson, clearly mortified by her supervisor's behavior, personally escorted Marcus through the remainder of the security screening process. Her movements were efficient and respectful as she tried to minimize any further delay or embarrassment. Miss Thompson, I'm so sorry about what happened, Johnson said quietly as she processed his belongings. That was completely inappropriate and not representative of how we're supposed to treat passengers. I appreciate that, Agent Johnson. Marcus replied. I could see that you were uncomfortable with how the situation was developing. I should have spoken up sooner, Johnson admitted. I should have intervened more forcefully when I saw what was happening. Marcus nodded, recognizing the difficult position junior employees often faced when confronted with discriminatory supervisors. Sometimes it takes courage to challenge authority, even when you know it's the right thing to do. But the damage to Reynolds's career was already irreversible and spreading exponentially through social media and news networks. Within hours, the video would accumulate millions of views across multiple platforms. By evening, TSA headquarters would launch a formal investigation that would examine not just this incident, but Reynolds's entire 12-year history of passenger interaction. By the end of the week, Reynolds would be terminated from federal employment, with a record that would make her unemployable in any security or customer service position. Her discriminatory treatment of a high-profile business leader would become a textbook example of how racial profiling could destroy careers and damage institutional reputation. As Marcus finally made it through security and headed toward the first-class lounge, he reflected on what had just happened and its broader implications for how discrimination operated in American society. He had built his company partly as protection against exactly this kind of treatment, believing that success would shield him from the assumptions and prejudices that followed black men through American society. Today had proven that no amount of money, influence, or achievement could completely eliminate discrimination. But it had also demonstrated that success could provide the power to demand accountability and create consequences for those who chose to discriminate. The first-class lounge welcomed him with the respect he deserved, and fellow business travelers approached to congratulate him on how he'd handled the situation. But Marcus knew the real victory wasn't in his personal vindication. It was in the knowledge that Reynolds would think twice before making assumptions about other black passengers. Sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice isn't anger or confrontation. It's having enough influence to ensure that discrimination carries real consequences. Marcus Thompson had proven that success, when combined with the right connections, could force even entrenched systems to acknowledge their failures and change their behavior. If this story moved you, remember that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of their appearance. Share this reminder that respect isn't earned through wealth or connections. It's something every person deserves simply by being human.